I don't know how many people are familiar with Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionist, who wrote a lot of popular but very technical, in many cases, very technical books about Darwinian evolution in the 70s and the 80s. And he died a few years ago, and I looked around on YouTube, and he has hardly any presence here, possibly because he's dead, but you know, certainly Carl Sagan is everywhere. One of Stephen Jay Gould's articles in one of his books, The Panda's Thumb, had a tremendous effect on me. And basically, in the story of the panda's thumb, Gould was showing how the jerry-rigged and clumsy design of biological creatures shows the imprint of natural selection. In the case of the panda, it's a bear. Bears are usually highly mobile and highly aggressive and will eat anything in sight. But the pandas, because they grew up in a panda paradise, basically sit around all day, hardly fight with anything, and just eat bamboo, endless bamboo. And they have a huge special thumb that other bears don't have, which is perfect for manipulating bamboo if you're going to eat it, which is really all they do. And it turns out that the panda's thumb isn't really a thumb at all. It's a highly elongated wrist bone, if I remember correctly. And the interesting thing from a biological point of view, showing how natural selection works, was that the pandas also have unnaturally elongated ankle bones that are like, you know, the thumbs. And the reason they do is that the gene or group of genes that causes the thumb to keep growing, the wrist bone to keep growing, also has exactly the same effect on the ankle bone. And so any natural selection pressure to any advantage to having big panda thumbs would cause you to have big panda toes. But the thing, but here's the part that, and this was, to him, was another one of the examples of, you know, proof of evolution, because this one genetic mutation would control both things. The thumbs were highly useful. The toes, on the other hand, were not useful at all. But the key thing is they weren't more of a deficit to the animal than the thumbs were a benefit. And what this basically said was, if evolution is selecting for the thumbs and it causes some other part of the animal to change in some way that is totally random but doesn't negatively affect its survival or its ability to procreate and raise grandchildren, essentially, then that other feature will just evolve along with the useful feature in its own stupid way. And in the case of the pandas, apparently, the toes are actually painful to them, or can be. They have to be careful. They're clumsy, and the toes can actually hurt them. But being in pain and being clumsy is not so much of a deficit in the environment that the pandas grew up in as having good thumbs for eating a maximum amount of bamboo is a benefit. Okay, so you see where you get that. When I read this, the thing that immediately struck me, because I was because I guess I had read Alan Watts by then, and I had completely accepted intellectually a lot of the things that I've talked about from Alan Watts, ideas of, you know, our interdependence with our virtual identity with the universe and all this kind of stuff. But I was still kind of in that, you know, that pre-Alan Watts mechanical minded view of things. And so the thing that immediately occurred to me when I read this was that there was no evolutionary benefit for us being self-conscious in the sense that we fear death and wonder who God is and are afraid in a way that is metaphysical, that it has no evolutionary benefit. But that, I mean, this is a story I tell myself. I'm not an evolutionist. I haven't proved this by any means. It's a story I told myself, that it occurred to me that our entire civilization and all of our so-called problems, that I had just seen a way to think about differently from Alan Watts but hadn't quite absorbed yet, that all of our problems are like the panda's toes. They're an accidental byproduct of the benefits that come from a big brain and increased problem solving and organizational skills. In other words, there are animals that can organize and solve problems and things like that, but we do it so much better that we pass some point and all of a sudden our ability to simply solve problems and get organized passes into a place where we start wondering about things that just don't matter, and that torture us and make us beautiful, make us what we are, make us the human race. But that all of that is an evolutionary accident, is the thing that is on top of the ability that took us out of the realm of the animals simply by making us a much, much better animal. I always think that that a story that people believe that is not true, objectively not true, nevertheless must have a special meaning for us to believe it. That is the, I at some point I used to have the they're trying to trick me attitude toward religion, that I see so often here on YouTube. Don't be a dummy, don't play, don't play, three-card Monty. It's fixed. That kind of atheism. And I still don't want to be cheated, but at the same time, I fairly early, it was pretty obvious to me that they weren't random stories. And it occurred to me that I just got this idea. I don't know whether it's poetic or whether it really has any meaning at all for the real world. But it just occurred to me that the Genesis story of Adam and Eve in the garden and of original sin was a Darwinian story. Or more precisely, it pleased me to suddenly see the long forgotten pre-biblical people who had come up with this story, because the story predates the writing of the Bible, were so close to that point where humans really stepped away from the animals. Or maybe we would still do this today, but they looked at the animals and they looked at themselves and they saw how the animals lived and they saw how we lived, and they were jealous of the animals who hadn't tasted of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, because Adam and Eve in the garden were animals. They didn't worry about clothing. They didn't have laws, and they didn't know that it was wrong to disobey God. And they ate of the fruit of knowledge, the tree of knowledge, and they got the knowledge of good and evil. They didn't ask for it. Suddenly they had it, and after they had it, all their children for all time were stuck with this fear of death and confusion and chaos and these ridiculous, unnecessary ideas that are nevertheless the thing that makes being a human being enjoyable if you enjoy it. End of vlog.